Path of Exile is a game I have a serious love-hate relationship with. Every aspect about it that is unique and exciting creates so much pushback, and it's very unfriendly to anyone below a certain level of spreadsheet fetishism. It's why I've simultaneously poured way too much time and money into this game, but also stopped playing for 5 years and suppressed the thought of touching it again. But I was trapped in a hotel room for 3 weeks with nothing but a laptop and garbage Wi-Fi, so I figured I'd really dive into Path of Exile again. It's still fun, it's still pain, but overall I'd say it's gotten better and less painful over the years without compromising on the things that make it so enticing. I will add a disclaimer that, while I have a lot of time in this game and know a lot of random intricacies, I'm also really bad at it. Getting far on my own requires a skill set I keep testing, but I'm ultimately kind of bad at. Path of Exile is a free ARPG like that of Titan's Quest and Diablo. These are top-down, horde-focused RPGs where the central gimmick is the endless quest for loot to continuously optimize your character until the heat death of the universe. Or until you decide to make a new character and start it all over again with a possible head start using gear from other characters. This game stands out among the genre with its ADHD level of hyperfixation on choices. It prides itself on just being an absolute information overload, and to its benefit as well, since this game provides unparalleled build variety and tweaking, which is juxtaposed by the gameplay itself being very simple all things considered. The story of Path of Exile starts with your character being exiled, surprisingly, to an island full of wild beasts and savages who were also once exiled from their home in Oriath, known as Australia. I mean Rayclast. After being thrown overboard, you wake up on the shore and have to fight your way through the risen, decayed bodies of other exiles who perished on these shores. Because this game wastes no time in setting up that Rayclast is brutal and not even death is an escape, all life in Rayclast is hostile. Even crabs have resorted to gang violence and will mug you on sight. Once you make it to the end of the beach and defeat the boss blocking access to the town, you're given a level up, the first of many on your way to sinking into an endless gameplay loop of farming. When you level, you gain a passive skill point which can be applied to the passive tree to slowly build out your character's damage and defenses. So let's open it up and... Okay, I know this is a lot, but just take a few breaths and we'll get through this just fine. So this is Path of Exile's passive tree. It's really not as complex as it looks, it's just intentionally introduced very abruptly. The idea is if players see all these choices immediately, they will either get scared, or you will get a massive erection. This weeds out the kind of players this game wants to cater to. If you aren't a fan of numbers or convoluted bullshit, you were warned. But if you are one of those who passed out from the priapism of possibilities this plethora of passives provide, then you're in good hands. I'll go into detail on this when I talk about building characters. All you have to know going in is that this is actually shared by every character you can choose from. So in reality, if you say, pick a witch, and want to throw fireballs at people, you only really have to worry about this much of the passive tree, making it much easier to process. Now that we've woken up from our fever dream of statistics before leaving the literal tutorial, we can actually start playing the damn game. Path of Exile's campaign follows a 10-act structure. Each act starts with you arriving in town, following the main quest and defeating the final boss of the act to move on. The story and world building of this game is pretty good, but you really need to have the patience to sit down and listen to or skim through a shitload of dialogue. Every act has one safe zone, which is where your NPCs and merchants are. Nearly every one by the end of the act will have several minutes of dialogue a pop between the speed of them talking and how much they actually have to say. Not to mention all of the voiced lore bits you can find around the world that can also be quite lengthy. But if you take the time to listen to it, the mythos they created for this world is overall pretty fucking cool. The NPCs themselves talk mostly about things they've only heard from stories, while they also do offer lore dumps written by the ancient figures themselves, complete with some really good voice acting.
Altitude is imperative to forging a stable connection with the prime resonator in Theopolis. Power source is equally vital. Locate a fissure in the mountainside and lower a conductive cable into it. The deeper, the better.
I also love how the environments and enemies slowly progress through the game to get darker and more dangerous. There's a lot of nice touches in the environment to sell this. Despite having done the campaign so many times, I still enjoy the build up to fighting the Act 1 mid-boss. You wash up on a shore with nothing but a stick and a stiff drink to keep you alive. Ray-class welcoming party is there to meet you as you're surrounded by shambling undead, decaying corpses barely strong enough to walk, but will still kill you regardless. Your task is to get inland, but you need to cut through the prison, so you walk along the coast getting assaulted by tribes of cannibals and later much of the wildlife. After dipping into a flooded cave and fighting the sea creatures dwelling within, you make it out higher on the cliffside along the coast as you now fight goatmen in their natural territory. But now that you're more inland, you can finally reach the prison, a convoluted maze of prison cells with bodies strewn everywhere, with a very eerie ambience that makes you cherish the light radius around your character, and might be the first place you realize the size is tied to your current health, when you suddenly can't see shit until you chug a potion. Much like the rest of the island so far, anything resembling a civilization is long gone, and there's nothing but scavengers left, further reinforced by the area containing necromancers who no doubt love this place as they have a near infinite amount of bodies to play with. What sells this place is also the fact that you have to travel through 3 separate zones to get out, 2 main levels and a final boss level where you meet your first intelligent person out in the field since you got there. Now, after fighting barely reanimated corpses, tribes of goat shaman, and crabs, you're forced to fight the warden of the prison, who is this hulking block of muscle whose first action is to hook you in to beat the shit out of you while speaking to you in a pretty damn intimidating voice. Now, this is just the first half of Act 1, but it still slaps 12 years later. The rest of the game generally follows us too. It doesn't always constantly progress the enemies to be bigger threats, but will try its damnedest to make enemies fit the tone and story of the area, like this one place in Act 2 that's a decayed hall brimming with remnants of dark magic from whatever wild thaumaturgical shit went down. So it's full of zombies, oversized spiders, and necromancers. Very easy enemies to deal with, but it makes the area stand out as you were being swarmed by turbo bears and bandits just a few minutes ago. Path of Exile also does something I think might be a first of its kind for the genre, not forcing you to replay the game 3 times over to reach the highest level stuff. Generally, when you beat the campaign, you restart it, but everything is a higher level and it keeps scaling until the highest level is reached so you can farm the stuff at the top end. Path of Exile used to do this, in fact, but these madmen made the decision to turn the pathway to endgame into a single run of the campaign by going from 4 acts you would play 3 times to a 10-act playthrough. Because of this, the game fully expects you to be able to start endgame content right after the final boss. It's fun throughout still, though Acts 6 through 10 do feel weird, kind of like how after Act 4 you repeated Acts 1 through 4 over again. You effectively play remixed versions of Acts 1 through 5, and they greatly change the power dynamic of the story. You go from killing exaggerated but still grounded threats of people or creatures with powerful magic, to immediately slaying gods. Once you hit Act 5, every boss is a literal god now, and you just go on a killing spree. The only reason I really mind is because they introduce the main villain for the rest of the story midway through, who demolishes you, so you come back when you're stronger and trounce on him in the end. But 5 minutes after you get destroyed, you're mulching through every god you see, so I just don't have any frame of reference for how much stronger my character has become. Evidently it's enough to defeat them, but it would have been nice if they held off on the god slaying until deeper into the story. That said, the fights are quite fun, so this is purely from a story perspective, and to be frank, the people who actually get into Path of Exile will play through the story enough times that they don't care about the details anymore. The second issue is that Acts 6 through 10 are largely remixes of Acts 1 through 5. It changes the story tone and some of the environment's looks, but it only starts to come into its own in the second to last act. The rest is retreading the same ground, but either in a different order or a different direction with a few new areas here and there. Act 6 starts back at Lioneye's Watch from Act 1. You go up the coast the same way, except you fight Karui warriors during the day, and there's huts with some more greenery around. Next area, you go back along the same marsh to kill a Karui archer to open up the path to what was the optional area with the fetid pool, but the area after that is more or less a remix of the coastal cliffside that leads you directly into the prison with the exact same layout. Except instead of descending, you enter a tower with a different layout which goes up a few floors before killing the Act 1 mid-boss and one of the Act 4 penultimate bosses. It's not a big deal as it's just enough to keep the whole playthrough fresh, but it's still a little disappointing. A lot of Part 2 is about hunting down the same villains all over again. The entire world being flooded with ancient gods causing chaos is a fucking side plot. I do have one other issue with the campaign as a whole, not just the later acts. The quests in this game offer nothing for the most part. Beyond extra dialogue and lore, so many quests don't give you anything worth doing, not just from the perspective of someone who's played this game over and over, but in general. For example, one of the most convoluted quests involves you finding an item early into Act 3, taking it to a guy in the middle of Act 3, then finding an item later in that act and bringing it back. Your reward? A single, unidentified rare tier ring, of which you probably found 3 or more along the way, and will almost certainly be dogshit. I'll get into why that is later. It's a bit disappointing because oftentimes side quests are the only reason to visit a number of side areas in this game. So it's a shame they just don't offer anything remotely good. The only side quests that ever give anything good are the ones that grant skill points. Just about all other good rewards are a part of the main quest line. Not to mention the objectives for every quest just involve you going to a location and killing a thing, either for the sake of it or to get an item, and while that is the point of this genre, a little creativity would be nice. I understand reviewing the campaign on Path of Exile in detail is like going to a strip club and reviewing the food, but it's part of the experience, and there are people who will only play the campaign. It's good, and I think it could be made even better, even if the improvements won't affect the vast majority of the players. But once you complete the story, you move on to the endgame map system, which is the main draw of this game long term. This is the most unique and fleshed out endgame system I've played in a game. It's remarkably simple at its core, it's an excellent use of existing assets, and it is incredibly replayable. The maps are introduced to you in the form of a second freeform campaign, more or less. Until they change the story for the 5th fucking time, you wake up on the beach of the Karui people's main island and are given the debriefing about an entirely different realm comprised of familiar miniature worlds stitched together that we need to study, as there have been some weird disturbances that could possibly leak out into this world. So we investigate these worlds by straight up wiping out all life on them. Maps in Path of Exile are individual areas similar to many of the areas you've played in the campaign, but the goal is to kill every last enemy, including the boss. While every zone in Path of Exile had a unique boss, it was often not worth fighting them unless a quest was involved, but in maps they are a lot stronger, can have remixed mechanics, and drop a lot more items. In particular, have a much higher chance at dropping another map, which allows you to repeat this process all over again. Each map gives you 6 portals to work with. Leaving the map in any way, either manually dying or logging out, forces you to use another portal to get back in. This is where your builds will be tested the most. During the campaign, you could abuse the fact that you have infinite retries to whittle down enemies' health if your build sucked, but in maps, you only get 6 chances. On top of that, a major difference between maps and the campaign is that each map is an item you can craft like any piece of gear in the game. Crafting a map makes it harder, but greatly increases the amount of rewards and enemies inside of it. You need to be very careful what you roll, as the modifiers do not pull punches. Heavy damage increases on enemies or debilitating nerfs to yourself. One nice part about the way these mods are set up, however, is many of them are pretty specific nerfs, so it's possible to roll maps that aren't much harder than an unrolled map. For example, we can go back to our Fireball Witch from the start. All I use is Energy Shield, high elemental resistances, and fire damage over time. If I rolled a map where monsters blind on hit, I have reduced armor, monsters are resistant to curses, and they have 100% of their physical damage added as extra fire damage. I'm not really hurting that much. It'll only add 20% more damage after my resistances. I don't use armor, spells are unaffected by blind's accuracy decrease, and curses aren't a substantial part of my damage, so I get a free 70% increased quantity of items and 18% more enemies in the map. You are also expected to craft up maps because each map has a bonus objective involving killing the boss while the map is crafted to a certain rarity. If you complete these bonus objectives, you not only gain a higher chance at finding maps of a higher tier than the one you're on, but you gain an Atlas skill point, which leads me to the next thing that maps focus on other than endlessly running them over and over again. Leagues. Essentially, every update and expansion comes with a separate server that involves a new mechanic being added, as well as a fresh restart to the game's economy. The current league, for example, is Keepers of the Flame. This is a rework of an older league called Breach, and it comes in 2 forms. The standard Breach, where you touch a portal, a wave expands, and you kill enemies as it spawns to stabilize it before it can collapse. After it's stabilized, it spawns a few rare enemies for you to kill before closing. Then there's the Hives, which have you fight your way through an existing stable breach field to get to the center, and making sure enemies don't attack the NPC trying to close it, with occasional buffs and debuffs you can use to make your life easier as enemies pour in. The main reward loop here is not only the items dropped by enemies, but also the womb gifts that you get, which, when put in the Genesis tree, give birth to a variety of items. And no, I'm not using flowery language to be weird, that's literally what it's called. You also have a small pregnancy passive tree that allows you to influence what kinds of items and what kinds of modifiers are on those items to tailor it towards your build. But once the league is done, every character goes to standard and the devs decide what to do with the mechanic. If it gets added to the core game, you'll find it in maps at a low chance. So occasionally you'll find random interruptions in your map clearing quest to do various side objectives from previous leagues. One moment you're playing tower defense, the next, you're managing a convoluted network of NPCs in order to extract the best rewards you can while they keep hunting you down, and then you take a break by gardening. Unfortunately, the only thing you're growing is pain. Now that's what I call aggro-culture. They really don't hold back sometimes. While many league mechanics are, here's a small area you're locked into, fight lots of shit and don't die, when they want to make more complicated mechanics, it's really fun. Heist is a mechanic where you find contracts similar to maps, grab a couple of heist members to use their skills in order to bypass traps, loot the place while managing your alert meter, and then make a big escape once you grab the object at the end. You can pick and choose what rewards to go for because of the alert meter. The way out is different and more difficult than the way in due to traps activating and doors closing alongside floods of enemies spawning in, and it rewards you more for having a chunkier build than the rest of the game due to the mechanic where any item marked contraband is dropped on death and you only get one chance once the alarms are triggered. Then there's the idle game built into Path of Exile. You can use your excess gold found from maps to fund the city, hire farmers to grow crops, hire mappers to use your excess maps to gain additional rewards, use the ore deposits you find in maps to supply blacksmiths you can hire, scrap excess items you don't need with the disenchanter, and once you have enough supplies, you can send out shipments which take several hours, but return with valuable currency. There's a lot of side mechanics you can mess with that have been stacking up over the years. Those Atlas skill points I mentioned, this is where they come in. Introducing Passive Skill Tree, the sequel. You can tweak your Atlas experience in any way you want, as long as you have the points for it. Do you want to play the tower defense missions called Blight? Well, with this, you can make it so there's one in every map, they spawn way more enemies, bosses are harder but more rewarding, you can loot the towers after the encounter for even more goodies, and make it so you do less damage to blight enemies yourself, but your towers do so much more damage that you can farm them even with dogshit builds, so long as you know what towers to build. Or if you're more of a crafting focused guy, you can make it so every map has a Harvest League mechanic, add a chance to duplicate rewards, and make it so you always get a minimum enemy tier per encounter. But if you just want to be a normal mapper, you can also spec into passives that generally boost the difficulty of standard enemies and bosses while giving you more rewards or allowing you to farm influence maps easier to get access to more of the special rewards. This game gives you so much fine-tuning in exactly how you want to play, it's insane. A nice byproduct of this mechanic is, in a way, the Atlas passives are an extension of your build. You're able to tweak the Atlas passives to better suit the strengths of your build. If you're a glass cannon that runs through maps at Mach speed, nuking everything before it can react, you probably want to avoid bosses and focus on mechanics that revolve around the total amount of enemies killed. But if you have a very self-sustaining build with good enough damage, you can try your hand at farming the end-to-end game pinnacle bosses for some crazy valuable items. Some builds just can't do everything in this game, and that's great with how well you can pick and choose what content you play. So it's about time I go into Path of Exile's insanity. This is the real reason you end up playing Path of Exile for thousands of hours. This game has a genuinely horrifying level of build customization. I'll talk about the 3 builds I made this league before going into what makes a build work.
And in this corner, we have the bad burning bitch who makes your bottom of business. The Preparation H salesman.
I sat down on stream, build planned out and everything. I just forgot the most important part. The name. Since it was a build based around burning people, I thought, oh, I burn their asses. And that was the first thing to come up. They get better, I promise. This build is an example of a league starter. No frills, nothing expensive required, just a simple workhorse build that gets you through maps to start your actual main build for this league. This was a fireball witch that focused primarily on igniting enemies. Fire a ball, enemies fall. But later I invested in a unique that offered a fun bonus. Enemies that die ignite other nearby enemies with an equal ignite. Essentially, igniting a single enemy spreads to the entire pack like wildfire. It might be simple, but goddamn if it wasn't satisfying. Overall, this build wasn't good, given the whole I'm not good at this game thing, but it was fine. It did its job, and I went decently far, but the skill couldn't overcome me. I hadn't played Path of Exile in 5 years, so I was very rusty and I didn't know how strong Fireball is as a league starter, as some skills simply are worse than others, unless you can get a lot of investment in them. Thankfully, I made enough currency off this build to fund my next one.
For our next round, we got the Mad Mama who's been dominating more than the brackets. Paul Tommy Mommy!
Okay, I didn't say the names got that much better. But this is a build I've wanted to make for almost a decade now. I love summoning builds, but I always wanted to be a summoner who gets in the thick of it and beats people up alongside their back from the dead boys. Finally, I found an in to make this build work without insane investment. This alternate version of Dominating Blow allows bonuses to minion damage to apply to my damage with this skill at up to 3 times the value. Whenever I kill an enemy, they turn into a Sentinel of Dominance, which follows me around and absolutely beats the shit out of people. If it's a magic or rare enemy, they also retain their modifiers, but I get less of them. It's especially nice if I can get a rare enemy with some good damage boosting auras, so my whole entourage becomes even stronger. It struggled more with clearing packs, so to fix this I used war cries that made my melee attacks hit 2 extra nearby enemies, and drank a tincture that made all 3 hits have AoE, so my single target attack started nuking packs. To further boost my summons, I used another war cry that granted nearby allies a portion of my weapon damage to them. I only used 2 other uniques to make this build work. One is a helmet that disables all non-Sentinel of Dominance minions, while also doubling the amount of Sentinel Dominance I could have, totaling 12 normal, 6 magic, and 2 rares. Then I used a unique jewel to squeeze more minion damage out of the passive tree by straight up converting several nodes into heavy minion damage bonuses. It was a bitch to find because these items run on random seeds that you have to run through a fucking website to discover without buying them, because they can be expensive just to test. And yes, you can directly modify or build tumors onto your passive tree, as if it wasn't intimidating enough. The most expensive part was just getting good gear so I could survive and deal damage, as this build was more reliant on my weapon being good. I'd say overall this build borders on being good. I did the highest level of maps and it wasn't too expensive, but my DPS was on the lower side as I got up there. Which, all things considered, isn't bad that I only started to struggle at the very end, but there's no way in hell I'm doing endgame bosses with this thing.
Facing her today is the man who cannot be stopped. It's the dominating versus the indomitable, the Wall!
This is another build I kinda always wanted to make. I really like a character whose shtick is just being unkillable and outlasting everything. But for years, I have always been so bad at this game that I struggled to build for damage and defense at the same time. But with various buffs to defensive options over the years, making them easier to get, I tried my hand at a shield bash focused character. Nothing crazy going on here, just a guy who's tanky and spanky, using expensive armor and shields to get the most damage, since my damage comes from my shield's defensive stats. With this sheer girth, over 10% of my health regenerated every second, heavy amounts of armor, increases to maximum elemental resistances, and capped chance to block, I truly became what I sought out to be. Is the damage good? Okay, well about that. Admittedly, I quit the build because I got all the fun I wanted out of the league before I could realize its full potential, but the damage was just okay. It worked, but it was not a boss fighting character by far. Instead, I used him for heist, rolling up on a door backed by an entire military platoon, shield charging past, and killing everyone I trample on, and then leaving like nothing happened is so satisfying. But overall, I felt like actually getting to the point where my builds are good enough has definitely gotten easier over the years. Before this point, nearly every single build I had made in the past never got anywhere near as far as these builds have. We interrupt today's program to announce the sponsor, my friend, who bought me a Crunchwrap Supreme so I can stop being a little baby-ass bitch and show off one of the more interesting skills. Behold. So how do you actually reach this point? There's two ways to do it. First, just look up a build guide for the skill or unique item you want to abuse. Chances are someone will have done all the work of what I'm about to talk about for you, and there's no shame in using a build guide. It's incredibly convenient, and you can easily find builds that are infinitely better than anything you can make without a huge amount of experience in this game. Or you can be like me and always make your builds from scratch. To me, Path of Exile is more about solving a puzzle than it actually is playing the game, so I get a lot of satisfaction from theory crafting on my own. This is partially because the vast majority of builds effectively devolve into setting up a Rube Goldberg machine that is activated when you hit your ability key. You may have supplemental skills, but the vast majority of the gameplay is pressing your travel skill button, then hitting right click. That's the extent of mechanical expression in this game beyond bosses. But if you're one of the mad lads making their builds from scratch, they follow three main groups. Going from simplest to the most complex, you have your skills, your passive tree, and your gear. Skills in Path of Exile are items that get slotted into your gear. If you have the stats for it, you can use any skill, even if it's not one that's naturally offered by merchants for your character. With the skills selected, you now have the basis for your build, and your support gems will dictate your specialty in that regard. I chose to start the league with a Fireball Witch, but due to the high damage per hit nature, it can also make a solid Ignite choice, so most of my support gems specifically boosted damage over time. While there exist a lot of general support gems for a skill like this, they don't always affect Ignite. This game has extremely specific wording generally, so omitting two words is the difference between a gem actually working in your favor or not. In this case, I scale with elemental damage, fire damage, ignite damage, and damage over time, but not spell damage, as ignites caused by spells aren't the spell itself. Yes, that is an important distinction. Another distinction is anything that boosts damage with hits, specifically only applying to the impact damage, not any subsequent ailments you apply. It does result in some descriptions being way too cumbersome because you'll see a lot of things labeled with hits and ailments. The other big difference maker is more and increased. I was not joking, that's how specific this is. More is a multiplicative bonus that multiplies with everything in just about every situation. Increased always adds together, even if it's a different type of increase. With your skill and archetype set up, now for the skill tree. Like I said before, this is more bark than it is bite, but it is a lot to process, so I'll make it a bit easier to pay attention to. There. The essence of this skill tree is to plot a course to get a good balance of defense and damage in the most efficient manner. The main reason I say it's not as convoluted as it looks is because this skill tree is designed to accommodate all 7 characters. They all share the same tree, but at different starting points. So for any given build, you only need bonuses to what's immediately relevant to you, and as such is usually clustered in the same area. Especially with subclasses that were added later in the game's life, these provide so much power that there's very little reason to leave your character's conventionally good builds unless you're doing something very specific, which you'd only be able to pull off well if you very much know what you're doing. My Fireball Witch was an Elementalist, and one single node granted me 2 more golems I can have out, massively increased the buffs they provide me, and made them immune to elemental damage and resummoned them automatically 4 seconds after they die. The buffs alone pretty much add half of my passive tree worth of bonuses on top of itself. Massive health regen and defense boosts, huge damage in AoE, almost capping my chaos resistance, and almost negates my mana cost. So with that in mind, when you decide what you're going to do, generally you're either going to focus on this area or this area of the starting location. One nice touch is that the passive tree is a gradient of playstyles going through all the characters. So going right towards the shadow starts introducing more chaos damage, damage over time, and attack bonuses, whereas going left towards Templar is focused more around general elemental bonuses alongside attacks. So naturally, the majority of my tree hangs around the Witch and Templar. The only reason I have this branch going out to the shadow side is because I'm stupid and didn't realize my Elementalist could easily cap chaos resistance with my golem. So I went this far to get the keystone node called Chaos Inoculation. Keystones grant massive bonuses that you can sometimes define your build around, but at the cost of something either intrinsically or explicitly, so you have to specialize in that thing. Chaos Inoculation sets your HP to 1, meaning you rely entirely on Energy Shield for defense and you have a really low stun threshold, but you're immune to chaos damage, period. Not only mitigating a counter to Energy Shields, but outright ignoring an entire damage type, even if it's less common. Other examples include Mind Over Matter. A portion of damage you take comes from mana before life, so if you build a ton of mana capacity and regeneration, you have a huge layer of defense, but if it's not up to snuff, you gain nothing and have almost no mana. Then there's Eternal Youth, which halves all overtime recovery of life, but makes it so Energy Shield recharge applies to life instead of Energy Shield. So now you recover life slower normally, but if you step out of combat for 2 seconds, it shoots back up. With things like Wicked Ward and uniques that trigger Energy Shield recharge, you can have a much higher total recovery, even if it's less consistent and you're screwed over by damage over time. One last aspect of planning builds that make it easier to process is the symbols on all the clusters. It makes it easier to skim through and see what bonuses pertain to you the most. It's not 100% accurate, as sometimes a cluster will have 2 effects, so the symbol shows one you don't want as much. Like this cluster that has block and casting bonuses. Block is way more valuable, but because of the mastery system where the wheel itself is a passive node, they don't want to make it a block wheel, but instead a caster wheel. Thankfully, there is a search feature. Once you get the vague idea of where things are and not drifting too far from where you need to be, the hardest part of learning the passive tree is that it touches upon every mechanic in this game. If it wasn't apparent already, this game is insane when it comes to the amount and depth of its mechanics. Leech being a prime example. In every game ever made, if you have 1% life leech, hit for 100 damage, you get 1 life back. But nope, Path of Exile won't use a mechanic if it isn't obfuscated by 3 layers of bullshit. Leech in this game is a form of recovery, but specifically not regeneration when it comes to anything that increases global regeneration. Each hit creates an instance of Leech. Each instance at base heals 2% of your maximum life per second, and heals up to 10% of your max life total. You have an additional cap of 20% life regenerated per second across all stacks. If you didn't know this, you would look at nodes that try to boost leeching values and repeatedly scream, "What the fuck does any of this mean?" You could reasonably get an idea that leech isn't instant in this game, but the specific mechanics are important to know since you can increase each aspect of leech individually, especially when it sounds like they do the exact same thing. And don't worry too much about misplaced skill points. It's actually pretty easy to respec a large part of your skill tree thanks to gold. When you're going through the campaign, the cost is dirt cheap. It does get decently expensive when you reach maps, not to a point where it feels debilitating though, especially when the amount of gold you use outside of the idle game is pretty much nothing. Once your skill is picked out and your tree is made, the final and hardest part of making it good is the gear. While you have all your options on the passive tree and gems very easily accessed, the balance between defense and damage from gear is a lot more nebulous because there's so many different ways to gear out your character beyond the basics. But the bigger issue is that Path of Exile is extremely stingy with loot. To get something good in Path of Exile, it requires layers upon layers of weighted RNG. Whenever you get a rare tier item, it can have up to 6 modifiers. These modifiers all have different weights to them, so some are more rare than others, and higher tiers of those modifiers are also weighted against. This all makes sense. Better stuff is hard to get, but the degree at which it's weighted is steep on an individual basis. And when I say good gear is sparse, usually I try and find all my gear. I'll hit maps, and then I'll spend 2 to 3 days just grinding maps and getting walled by mid-tier maps, running them over and over, with maybe 2 moderate upgrades to show for it in those couple days. The treadmill is just incredibly slow on its own. Instead, Path of Exile employs the age-old method of infinite monkeys with infinite typewriters, because out of all the hundreds of thousands of players playing, someone will have what you want. Path of Exile tries really hard to make this a game you can't easily play alone. You can, there is a setting to disable trading called Solo Self-Found, but it is very much for the masochists. From the gear to the league mechanics, there's too much going on that has a low enough drop rate that anyone who doesn't have a restraining order against the sun will likely only see a fraction of the drops. This goes for uniques and currency items as well. Some uniques are just insanely rare, and one of the rarest items in the game is a currency that duplicates any given equipment with a drop rate that gets measured in the hours of efficient playtime instead of per kill. The Mirror of Calandra is estimated to drop once every 10 to 20,000 hours of playing. 1,000. So after a few days, I usually just give up on trying to find my own stuff and used my currency to buy better gear, instantly getting a full set of gear twice as good, allowing me to do more damage and survive way better. While the slow currency grind is nice, it's consistent, and you know you can always trade with other people, it does feel disappointing sometimes. There's something about just farming up what is effectively gold and cashing it in that doesn't hit the same as finding a good drop. But when you do get those insanely rare drops, the dopamine high is unmatched. So as much as I hate it, the way the loot works when tied in with the trading isn't strictly bad, and it can give you a sense of accomplishment that you're doing a piece of content most people don't want to, so they rely on you for a supply, as almost all League mechanics can be used to improve your character somehow. Now to talk about trading, because it's essentially the core of this game. As mentioned, trading is Path of Exile's progression in a way, unless you're playing on the modes where you can't trade. So first we close Path of Exile. Because yes, Path of Exile is one of those games. Though in their defense and criticism, the Trade Index website is also run by them, so why it's not in the game? Just cause fuck you, really. Path of Exile up until recently generally takes the fuck your convenience because it makes things more valuable approach. Thankfully for currency, fragments, and other miscellaneous objects, the trade system for that is in the game. Not only is it convenient, but it even gives you the price people are selling them for, which is something you otherwise would have to look up on another website or the trade index itself. Don't worry though, I'll get into the whole third-party thing later. This changed recently, but at the time of writing this script and for the last 12 years, trading more often than not involved finding an item, messaging 40 different people, and waiting, with the whole process for less valuable or less common items being an annoyingly long break in the action. Sometimes you will be spending over 10 minutes looking through trade listings and trying to find people to trade with, which is a huge pace killer and a bigger reason I hate that trade is a major part of progressing in a timely manner. It already doesn't feel great when I gain so much power after what feels like a huge wall just by buying it, but the fact that happens after several minutes of staring at a spreadsheet punctuates just how ass it really is. However, now the game has a really nice feature. Having a premium stash tab allows you to convert it into a shop. Now, when you go to the trade website, you can filter by people who have their item in a shop, click the Travel to Hideout button, and then buy the item without waiting or having the other person be online. A very smooth process, if you want to spend money. Which takes us to the big question of cost. How free is this game and what can you buy? The answer is, it depends. If you play long enough or are dedicated enough, it's only as free as your patience will allow, and there will be a time where it truly becomes borderline mandatory if you're on the further end of the hardcore spectrum. That's because of stash tabs. You get 4 at base, and while they do hold quite a bit of stuff, this game drops even more. Last league, I played 3 characters for a decent amount of time each, and if you took all of my valuable or useful currencies only and put them in a stash tab, here is what it looks like. Now, here's what it looks like when I throw in all of my highest tier maps, which ideally you want to stockpile too. And because scarabs are a great way to get value out of your maps, you want as many as you can. So here's what the scarabs look like in my stash tab. Most of my free tabs are used up, and I haven't even stored gear, uniques, or other random stuff that's specific to a league, which can take up space, like these blight oils for example. Yes, you can condense your currencies into the highest tier and break them down later thanks to the currency exchange, but it's still a lot more effort put into managing your inventory that takes away from the gameplay. Oh, and trading? With a normal stash tab, you need to do some bullshit involving creating a forum thread and copying information into the post for it to be indexed by the trade website, or use a third-party program. With a premium stash tab, all you have to do is make the tab public, and then it's indexed by the trade website. Instead, I just see Path of Exile as one of the most generous demos out there. You can play this game for an insane amount of time without spending a cent, but you miss out on a lot of quality of life and efficiency by not having the currency tab and one of your normal tabs converted into a premium tab at the bare minimum. which will cost you at most $10. Stash tabs go on sale pretty regularly, but even with a discount, you might still have to spend $10 due to the fact that points are purchased in increments of $5 at minimum. Like all live service games, this uses their own proprietary points for purchase, but unlike other games, it actually converts well enough into US dollars. $5 gets you 50 points, and there's no buy bigger packs and get a bonus, so it's always $1 is 10 points. It does still sell you things that make you have leftover points, since you can't buy in multiples of 5, only 10. This isn't helped by discounts giving you numbers that don't end in 0 or 5 as well. Thankfully, this game does something really nice to help you save money. And that's by being so fucking expensive, you never want to spend money on it, period. Stash tabs are reasonably priced for how they offer a ton of convenience permanently for your account, but cosmetics are stuff that you'll likely want a fair bit of to have some variety, but the prices are insane. A full armor set, just the armor with no weapons, shields, or extra effects, is usually about $40, and it can get even more obscene than that. There are loot boxes which add new item sets. Once a loot box run is finished, the items are added to the store for individual purchase. Some older loot boxes had 2 themes, and if you combined them, you made a 3rd armor piece. So when they brought the old loot box items back, those combined sets are $84 fucking dollars. You don't even get everything, as this armor set specifically has an extra helmet type and shield not included with the bundle. Yes, I am wearing this armor, but there's a reason for that. I'm convinced prices are so high because the developers get a large portion of their revenue from supporter packs. Every league and major expansion for Path of Exile 1 or 2, they release new supporter packs which grant a variety of cosmetics, but most importantly, also grant the face value of the packs in points. So generally, your best bet is to buy a supporter pack every now and then and wait for whatever you want from the store to go on sale, which changes every day. It's still expensive, don't get me wrong, but they are a better value proposition. So they must have made everything this expensive to eat up all the points from your supporter pack, because it's wild to me that this game, since its launch, even when it was a tiny studio, charged obscene amounts for cosmetics. Also, the supporter packs are 100% time limited. If you miss them, you will never have another chance to get them again. You at least have 3 to 4 months to make up your mind for League supporter packs, and up to a year for expansion-based packs, but it's still an annoying layer of fear of missing out. Also, many macro transactions in Path of Exile 2 can be used in the first game, and vice versa as more support between the games gets implemented. At the very least, the supporter packs I purchased have worked. The last issue I have with this game is that it is far too convoluted for the tools it gives you. Builds are made with so many layers of modifications that the stat screen or your tooltip is unable to give you remotely accurate information. For example, modifiers that make enemies deal less damage or take more damage appear nowhere in your damage calculation because the game only shows you the values directly applied to you at that time. Further complicated by the game not having damage numbers, which I understand the mentality behind, and I love it personally, but without them, there's absolutely no way in-game to assess how effective anything you're doing actually is. Oh, and if you use minions, get fucked. They have absolutely no stats other than their health and their resistances to look at. On top of that, planning your passive tree is impossible in-game because there's no way to plot out a course ahead of time. You just have to know what you're doing already and remember what you were doing between sessions. Both of these issues are alleviated by third-party programs. If we take a step back to when I was talking about the passive tree, all of that was recorded in Path of Building, a build planning and calculations program that the community uses to know what the fuck their builds are even doing. Yes, it is a data overload, but programs like this are the only way to conveniently plot your route through the tree and test basics like what support gems work best, or how good of an upgrade gear will be before you buy it. And again, if you use minions, this is your only way to know what they're doing. Especially with the fact that until this current league, minions had accuracy you had to worry about. And you'd never know just how bad minion accuracy was. It doesn't just stop at builds. With trading being a big part of this game and how bloated with various items and uniques it is, you also have to turn to websites like PoE Ninja to look up prices taken off the trade index. You can get away with not using Path of Building if you know what you're doing or don't mind bumbling around a bit, but PoE Ninja is different because you can end up with a lot of fairly valuable stuff and not know it. And last, there's the item filters. On top of flooding you with more quantity than quality, the game by default doesn't provide you with a remotely decent filter. This is what the game looks like with the default filter after doing just one small chunk of a map. And here's what happens when I apply a stricter loot filter to only show items that are remotely worth looking at. Almost everything is gone because there's no reason for the vast majority of players to pick up white or blue items unless it's a rare base type or a high item level for people to craft. It's one thing to want a super efficient turbo mega loot filter and downloading one, but there's really no in-between by default. You either get no loot filter or basically no loot filter that highlights some things better. But I'll round this out with a few things I love about Path of Exile that most games don't do these days. The first is that this game plays surprisingly well on controller. Not only does it have some UI tweaks that make it scale better for television, but it even has features not available with mouse and keyboard, like the game pausing when you go to select a blight tower, and extra quick hotkeys to navigate the UI a bit better. It does suck that most of the inventories are still the same, so it's a lot slower, but the biggest issue stopping me from playing it with a controller more often is the fact that there's so much loot, it stops you from being able to pick shit up. When there's enough loot on screen at once, item nameplates can get displaced so far that clicking on it won't move you anywhere and you can't pick it up otherwise. On PC, you can reset this by pressing Z by default, but controller just does not have this function, so you effectively can't play the damn game. The last thing I appreciate is how much art is in this game, specifically the UI. Every menu is filled to the brim with details and backgrounds that I can never get enough of. Being so used to horribly bland, monotone UIs, it really is a breath of fresh air. So that's Path of Exile. I've never loved a game I'm bad at more, and that's fine. Path of Exile wouldn't be as exciting or interesting the way it is if it catered more towards me, because that nearly infinite seeming ladder of progression has so many rewarding moments that it's like the game purposefully gives you a gambler's high, forces you into a withdrawal just so that next hit lands even harder.